Shadows of the Blitz. The streets of London lay cloaked in darkness, only the faint outlines of buildings visible against a smoke-filled sky. The year was 1941, and the Blitz had turned the heart of the city into a war zone. The air was thick with fear, the sound of distant explosions, and the ever-present whine of air raid sirens. People rushed through the streets, their faces strained and eyes wide, their breaths visible in the cold night air. Every flicker of light, every shadow cast on a wall, seemed to carry with it the threat of another attack. In a small house on the eastern side of London, a family huddled together in their tiny living room. The walls were thin, barely enough to keep out the cold, let alone the threat of the war that raged above them. Mary Thompson, a young mother with deep brown eyes and hair tied tightly back in a bun, clutched her 3 children close. Her face, though lined with worry, held a determined calm. Her eldest, Edward, a boy of 14, sat closest to her, his eyes darting nervously to the window. Next to him was Clara, her thin frame trembling with every distant thud of a bomb. And then there was Eliza, the youngest, only 12. Her blue eyes were wide with fear, but filled with a quiet strength that seemed beyond her years. Mary's husband, George, was away fighting the Nazis in some distant part of Europe. She had heard nothing from him in weeks, not since his last letter, now crumpled and worn from being read too many times. The uncertainty of his fate weighed heavily on her heart, but she tried to keep her children reassured, if not hopeful. "Mummy, when will Daddy be back?" Clara asked, her voice small and trembling. Mary stroked Clara's hair and forced a smile. "Soon, darling, very soon. He promised he would come back to us." But even as she spoke, the doubt in her voice betrayed her. Eliza, sitting a little apart from her siblings, stared out the small window and the darkened sky, her fingers gripping the edge of the curtain tightly. "The planes are coming again, Mum," she whispered. Mary moved quickly, her heart racing. "Into the shelter, now!" Mary commanded. The children scrambled to the small, cramped understairs cupboard they used as a makeshift bomb shelter. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, blocking any light that might betray their presence to the enemy above. Outside, the siren's wail grew louder, and soon the first drone of German bombers filled the air. The terrifying sound grew until it seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. The family clutched one another, eyes wide, breaths held, as they waited for the inevitable. Suddenly, the night exploded with the deafening roar of bombs dropping, a terrifying percussion that seemed to tear the city apart, piece by piece. The house shook violently, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. The sounds were deafening, the whistling of falling bombs, the thunderous explosions, and the shattering of glass. Then, the unthinkable happened. A bomb fell close, too close. The walls groaned, the ceiling cracked, and with a terrible, splintering crash, the house was torn apart. The world went white, and then black. When the dust settled, there was nothing but silence. Mary lay still, her arms still wrapped around Edward and Clara, their faces pale and lifeless beneath her. The little house was in ruins, a heap of shattered wood and brick, the remnants of a family's life scattered across the street. But then, a small sound broke the silence, a faint whimper, a cry. Eliza, covered in dust and blood, slowly pulled herself from beneath the rubble. Her blue eyes were wide with shock and terror, her small frame trembling as she looked around at the devastation. "Mum? Edward? Clara?" she called out, her voice breaking, barely a whisper in the night. But there was no answer, only the distant sounds of war, the faint echo of another explosion far away, and the crackle of flames from burning buildings. Eliza stumbled to her feet, her legs weak and shaking. She stood alone in the cold, dark night of the Blitz, the last survivor of her family. The moon broke through the clouds, casting a pale light over the shattered street. She felt a chill run down her spine, a deep, gnawing fear that she had never known before. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized that everything she had known, everything she had loved, was gone in an instant. London continued to burn around her, the flames reflected in her eyes, but all Eliza could feel was the emptiness, a hollow ache that no tears could fill. She was alone now, in a city torn apart by war, her family taken from her in a flash of fire and fury. She sank to her knees, her small frame racked with sobs, as the city around her burned on into the night. But something stirred within her, a determination, a flicker of strength. She wiped her tears away with a dirty hand and looked up at the sky. "I won't be afraid," she whispered to herself. "Not anymore." And so, in that moment, a new story began for the girl who had lost everything, but who would not be broken. "You there?" A voice cut through the smoke and dust, commanding and sharp. "Come here, girl." Eliza turned her head slowly, her vision still blurred from the blast, and saw a tall, well-dressed man standing amidst the rubble. His suit was immaculate, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. He was thin and gaunt, with a pale complexion that seemed to glow in the moonlight. His eyes, however, were what drew her in. They were dark, almost black, and filled with a strange intensity. She moved towards him, her steps uncertain, her small hands trembling at her sides. The man watched her approach, a thin smile curling on his lips. "Anyone else alive in there?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost soothing. Eliza shook her head, trying to hold back the tears. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My mummy, Edward, and Clara. They're gone." The man's smile widened, a hint of something sinister flickering in his eyes. "So," he murmured, almost to himself, "you are all alone, just like me?" He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "And it so happens I have need of an assistant." Before she could react, the man's face transformed. His skin seemed to pull tighter over his sharp bones. His mouth parted to reveal long, gleaming fangs, and his eyes turned a deep blood red. In a flash, he moved, a blur of shadow and speed, and he was upon her. Eliza felt a sharp pain in her neck, like fire coursing through her veins. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The world around her darkened, and her body grew cold, numb. She could feel her heart slowing, her blood draining away. The last thing she saw was the man's eyes, burning like embers in the dark, and then there was nothing but blackness. Time passed. Seconds, minutes, hours. She couldn't tell. There was no sense of place, no sense of self, only a deep, empty void. But then something stirred within her, a flicker of light in the darkness. Her heart began to beat again, slowly at first, then stronger, more powerful. Her lungs filled with air, and she gasped, feeling a rush of something new. Eliza's eyes snapped open, and she bolted upright, a strange strength coursing through her small frame. She felt alive, more alive than she had ever felt before. Her senses were heightened. She could hear the distant sounds of footsteps, the rustling of leaves, even the faint beating of the man's heart nearby. Her vision was sharper, colours more vibrant, and every smell was distinct. The damp earth, the smoke in the air, the metallic tang of blood. "Ah," "Finally," the man said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. He stood a few feet away, watching her intently. "You have returned." Eliza stared at him, feeling an unnatural hunger gnawing at her insides. What have you done to me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. "I have given you a new life," the man replied, his smile growing. "A life beyond death, a life of power. I am in need of an assistant, you see. Someone small and quick, someone who can go unnoticed, slip through the cracks, take what is needed, and vanish without a trace." He paused, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Like a flea." Eliza felt a strange sensation, a surge of energy, a flicker of exhilaration at his words. She was no longer the frightened girl left alone in the ruins of her home. She was something else now, something more. "Like a flea," she repeated, a faint smile touching her lips. The man chuckled, a low, dark sound. "Yes, my little flea," he said, "that is what you shall be. But you must learn to use your new gifts, to master the shadows and move with the wind. I will train you, teach you everything you need to know." Eliza nodded, the hunger in her eyes growing fiercer. "Teach me," she whispered, feeling the power coursing through her veins, the cold strength of her new form. "I want to learn." And so, the man, her maker, took her under his wing, a dark mentor in a city ravaged by war. He taught her to move unseen, to strike quickly and disappear even quicker. Her small size made her agile, her new strength made her formidable, and her hunger made her relentless. She learned to slip through the shadows, to dance on the rooftops, and to vanish into the night like a whisper on the wind. She became his perfect assistant, his little flea, darting through the streets of London, a tiny deadly shadow, always moving, always unseen, always hungry. And as the bombs continued to fall and the city burned, the flea thrived, her new life just beginning amidst the ashes of the old. Eliza stood outside the entrance to a cave, the shadows deep and foreboding. The air was thick with dampness, and the faint scent of decay lingered in the cool breeze. Her senses were heightened, her every nerve on edge. The tall man, her maker, stood beside her, his dark eyes gleaming with an anticipation that made her uneasy. "That's the one," he whispered, his voice a mere breath in the still night air. "Go inside. When you have it, escape quickly. Do not tarry." Eliza nodded, feeling the pulse of her new, powerful heart quicken with a mixture of fear and excitement. She darted forward, moving through the small openings of the cave entrance, slipping through the narrow gaps with ease. Her small size made her agile, her vampiric nature made her swift. She moved like a shadow, darting past traps and alarms, her instincts guiding her through the darkness. Deeper and deeper she went, her steps light and silent on the cave floor. She could hear the faint echo of water dripping, the sound bouncing off the ancient stone walls. The air grew colder, the darkness thickening around her, but she continued, driven by the command of the tall man and the insatiable hunger that now defined her existence. Finally, she arrived in a large chamber inside the cave, the space illuminated by a dim, otherworldly glow. Strange symbols and markings covered the walls, ancient and cryptic, pulsing with a faint energy that made her skin tingle. At the center of the room, atop a pedestal, lay a stack of books, tomes of knowledge, bound in dark, cracked leather. But one in particular stood out, glowing faintly, its pages edged with gold. This was the book the tall man had sent her to retrieve. Eliza understood now why he had chosen her for this task. She was small, quick, and undetectable, able to slip through the narrowest cracks and blend into the darkest shadows. She moved carefully, her eyes darting around, watching for any movement, any sign of danger. She slipped through the shadows, her breath shallow and quiet. She reached out and grabbed the book, feeling its weight, the ancient energy coursing through it. But as soon as her fingers touched the cover, a deep rumble shook the chamber. Two large figures materialized before her, emerging from the darkness like nightmares given form. They were demonic, terrifying, with horns curling from their heads and eyes glowing like hot coals. Their bodies were covered in scales, their hands ending in razor-sharp claws. They spoke in an unknown tongue, their voices a low, guttural growl that sent chills down her spine. Eliza froze, her body tense with fear. Even as an elder, she felt a jolt of panic shoot through her. These were no ordinary creatures. They were demons, ferocious and powerful, their auras emanating a dark energy that filled the chamber with dread. She remembered the tall man's warning, "Do not engage with them. These demonic creatures are impervious to an elder's power." She knew she had to run. Eliza darted to the side, slipping into the shadows, moving with the speed and agility of a flea. The demons lunged at her, their claws slashing through the air where she had just been. She ducked and weaved, using every inch of her small frame to avoid their attacks. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. She moved through the cracks, the narrow passages that only she could navigate, her body a blur in the dim light. The chase was relentless. The demons hot on her heels, their growls echoing off the stone walls. She felt their breath on her neck, their claws just inches away, but she kept moving, slipping through the smallest openings, hiding in the darkest corners, just like a flea. She knew this cave well. She had memorized every turn, every crevice, every hidden path. After what seemed like an eternity, she saw the entrance, the dim light of the outside world calling to her. With a final burst of speed, she leapt out of the cave, landing softly on the damp grass. The tall man was waiting, his eyes fixed on the cave entrance. As soon as he saw her, he grabbed the book from her hands, his expression unreadable. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the ancient text. Then he smiled, a dark, satisfied smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "Excellent," he murmured, almost to himself. "This is an ancient tome of knowledge, demonic knowledge. With this, I will become unstoppable." He turned to her, his eyes gleaming with a fierce hunger. "But there are still more items I need you to collect for me, my little flea," he said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "Much more." Eliza nodded, hiding the fear that clawed at her insides. She knew now that she was bound to him, trapped in this new existence, this new life. But somewhere deep inside, a small part of her still remembered the girl she once was, the girl who had known fear and pain, but also love and hope. For now, she would be the flea, darting through shadows, stealing secrets, and serving her dark master. But one day, she would find a way to be free. Years slipped by, like shadows moving through the night, and Eliza had become little more than an instrument in the hands of the tall man. Her existence was marked by long stretches of isolation, broken only by the rare, commanding summons of her master. Each time he called, it was to send her on another errand, another mission to retrieve some powerful artifact or ancient relic, each one more dangerous than the last. Eliza had become an expert at moving through the dark. She had stolen from the dens of demons, slipped past the vigilant eyes of lycanthropes, and even eluded other elders, her skills honed to a razor's edge by years of relentless tasks. Her small stature and uncanny speed allowed her to weave through the tightest spaces, to hide in the darkest shadows, to vanish into nothingness. To him, she was the perfect tool, a little flea that could get in and out, where others could not. But when the missions ended, and the tall man had no use for her, he would cast her aside, like a forgotten trinket. She would return to the small, dark corner of the world he allowed her to inhabit, where silence was her only companion, and time seemed to stretch endlessly. Days, weeks, sometimes months would pass, without a word, a gesture, or even a hint of acknowledgement from her master. She was left alone, trapped in a cycle of emptiness and waiting. During these times of abandonment, the tall man's neglect felt like a slow poison, eating away at her spirit. She wandered aimlessly through the streets, slipping between the shadows like a ghost, unseen and unnoticed. Her existence was a hollow one, devoid of warmth or meaning. She had no friends, no companions, no one who truly saw her. She was an elder, yes, but not a powerful one, not a revered one, just a lonely creature, used for her peculiar talents, and discarded when she was no longer needed. When she was alone, Eliza often found herself wandering the rooftops of the city, gazing down at the streets below. She watched the people, humans, with their ordinary lives, their petty struggles, their brief joys. She watched mothers with their children, friends laughing together, lovers embracing. She watched them all, longing for what she could no longer have, longing for something she could barely remember. She often wondered what it would feel like to be held, to be loved, to feel the warmth of another's touch. She remembered, faintly, the days when she was human, when she had a mother, a brother, and a sister. But those memories were like faded photographs, blurry and distant, slipping further away with each passing year. Sometimes, when the emptiness grew too much to bear, she would allow herself to feel fear again. She would imagine herself caught by the creatures she was sent to rob, the demons with their fiery eyes, the lycans with their fierce jaws, the elders with their cruel smiles. She imagined them catching her, ending her miserable existence in a flash of violence. She imagined the darkness closing in, the pain searing through her, and she wondered if, perhaps, it would be a release, but even that seemed like a distant dream. She had been an elder for so long now that even death seemed out of reach. She was stuck in this endless twilight, a creature caught between life and death, between shadow and light, forever bound to the whims of the tall man. Every task brought with it a flicker of fear, a small spark of hope that maybe, this time, she would fail, that she would finally meet her end. But each time she succeeded, her instincts taking over, her body moving with a speed and precision she couldn't control. She would return to the tall man with the stolen item in hand, and he would take it from her without a word of thanks, without even a glance. Then he would disappear again, leaving her to her loneliness. Eliza had become a shadow herself, flitting through the world unnoticed, unwanted. She was a tool, nothing more, a means to an end for the tall man, a puppet dancing on invisible strings. Her life had no meaning, no purpose beyond the tasks he set for her. She was trapped in a nightmare that never ended, a darkness that never lifted. Her soul, if she still had one, was a deep well of sorrow. She could not even remember the last time she had felt joy or love or even simple contentment. All she knew was the fear, the pain, the endless waiting. All she knew was the emptiness. And so she waited, as she always did, for the tall man to call again. She waited, wondering if this time perhaps he would send her to her death, wondering if this time she would finally be free from this dark, endless existence, wondering if, somehow, there was still a way for her to find peace. But for now, there was only the darkness. For now, there was only the silence. And so she waited, alone in a world that had forgotten she ever existed. The tall man sat in his darkened chamber, surrounded by the ancient tomes and artifacts he had stolen over the years. He studied each page with an intensity that bordered on obsession, his eyes flickering over forbidden symbols, his fingers tracing lines of arcane script. The room was filled with an otherworldly energy, a strange hum that seemed to pulse from the very walls. He felt the power coursing through him, a power beyond that of any ordinary elder, a power born from knowledge forbidden to his kind. As he turned another page, he suddenly paused, his senses alert. He felt a presence, a familiar, powerful aura that filled the room like a shadow. He did not look up but spoke softly, his voice a mix of amusement and challenge. "No need to hide in the shadows, brother," he said, his smile widening. "We are all family here." From the dark corner of the room, Elder stepped forward, his expression inscrutable. He moved with the grace of a predator, his eyes never leaving the tall man. "To what do I owe this visit, Elder, Slayer of the Master?" the tall man asked, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. Elder's voice was calm, almost curious. "I am here to understand why you have abandoned your brothers and now dabble in powers that are not your own, demonic, lycanthropic, forbidden knowledge." The tall man's smile faded, and his eyes narrowed. "What do you care, Elder? You have never been one to follow the rules of the Elders." "Indeed," Elder replied, his tone measured. "But I have a concern, a minor one perhaps, but a concern nonetheless." He paused, his gaze piercing. "The Flea." The tall man's expression shifted to one of irritation. "She is mine," he snapped. "I will not trade her. What interest could she possibly be to you and Serana? Go make your own, Elder." Elder's eyes darkened, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "Do not speak in such a way to me," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You may think yourself powerful, but you do not know what you are dealing with." The tall man laughed softly, a mocking sound that echoed through the chamber. "Yes, I know you are powerful, Elder. Different. Much more powerful than me, perhaps. But—" he leaned forward, his smile returning, a sly, secretive smile. "I have something you do not. Elder, I have knowledge, unknown to the Elders." With a casual flick of his hand, two large demonic figures emerged from the shadows behind him. They were monstrous, towering creatures with twisted, unnatural forms, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening around them. The tall man's smile widened. "You see, I have mastery over these new allies of mine," he continued. "And as you well know, your powers, no matter how vast, are useless against demonic energy. You would be killed instantly." Elder's expression remained unreadable, but a faint tension tightened his posture. The tall man took a step closer, his voice a low, mocking whisper. "I will not give up my Flea. She is mine. And should you come here again, I will not think twice about killing you. Now be gone, Elder." For a moment, there was only silence. Elder stood there, his face a mask of calm, but his mind was racing, searching for answers, calculating possibilities. He gave the tall man a single lingering look, then turned and walked away, his steps silent as the grave. As he left, the tall man watched him with a satisfied grin, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of power. He knew he had struck a nerve, and he relished the thought of keeping Eliza under his control, using her as his tool, his little Flea, to gather more knowledge, more power. But deep in Elder's mind, plans were forming. He knew he would need to find a way to counter the tall man's newfound strength, to find a weapon against demonic energy, to understand the knowledge the tall man had gained. For now, he would retreat, but only to gather his strength, to bide his time. The game had changed, but it was far from over. Elder paced back and forth, frustration etched into his face. "He is too powerful," he muttered, almost to himself. "We may have left it too late. The tall man has grown in strength beyond anything I anticipated. I cannot risk sending you in there, Oliver. It is simply too dangerous." Serana watched him carefully, her face thoughtful. "Are you saying there's nothing we can do?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a hint of challenge. Eldor paused and looked at her. "I don't see a way," he admitted. "The Flea is lost to us, trapped under his control, and I will not sacrifice Oliver to save her." Oliver, standing in the doorway, had been listening quietly, his face pale and tense. "I won't go near the tall man," he said, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Elder, but I just can't. That place, it terrifies me." Eldor nodded. "I will not send you in there, Oliver," he reassured him. "But I can feel her pain, just as I felt yours. After my conflict with the Master, something changed in me. I can sense the suffering of other elders, their need, their fear. It eats at me, calls to me." Serana studied him for a moment, then a light seemed to flicker in her eyes. "Perhaps there is someone who could help us," she suggested. Eldor turned to her, intrigued. "Who?" Serana's lips curled into a knowing smile. "He said you helped him once. He might be willing to help us now," she said. "And isn't he duty-bound to stop any of us from becoming too powerful?" Eldor's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "Winter," he whispered. "Yes," Serana nodded. "He might be our only hope." Oliver's face softened with relief. "Winter. He would know what to do," he murmured, a faint hope kindling in his eyes. Eldor thought for a moment, his mind racing. "Winter is the only one who could match the tall man's cunning, who could challenge his forbidden knowledge," he said. "But finding him, convincing him, that is another challenge." Serana smiled, her expression almost playful. "I think Winter already knows," she said. "He always seems to know." Eldor sighed, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. "Then we must find him," he said resolutely. "For Eliza's sake, and for our own, we must free her before the tall man grows even stronger." "Winter has never failed before," Serana added, "and I don't think he will fail us now." Eldor nodded. "Let us hope you're right," he said quietly, "because this time we truly have no other option." As they prepared to seek out Winter, a flicker of hope ignited within them, a hope that the man behind the chrome mask would once again defy the odds and come to their aid. They needed him now, more than ever, to bring balance to their world and to save the little Flea from the darkness that threatened to consume her. Simon Winter sat alone in his dimly lit room, illuminated only by the soft glow of a computer screen. But this was no ordinary computer. Built with his own hands and mind, this machine was far beyond anything the world had ever known. It was an extension of himself, a device capable of processing information at speeds that defied imagination. His fingers flew over the keyboard with inhuman precision, knowledge flowing through the machine as if it were a living thing, a perfect union between man and machine. He paused, sensing a presence. Without turning his head, Winter spoke calmly. "Hello, Elder." From the shadows, Elder stepped forward, his expression guarded. "It has been some time," he replied cautiously. Winter nodded, still facing the screen. "Indeed, it has." Elder began, explaining the situation with the tall man and his growing power, but his words were tinged with apprehension. He remembered their last encounter vividly, the moment Winter had bested him, outmaneuvered him at every turn. Winter turned in his chair, finally facing Elder. His eyes were calm, almost amused. "I foresaw this," he said. "I've been aware of the tall man for some time. His hunger for forbidden power has not gone unnoticed." Elder frowned. "And yet, you did nothing." Winter leaned back, a faint smile on his lips. "I didn't need to. You're already powerful enough to deal with him. You just needed a push. And perhaps a little guidance." Elder's wariness deepened. "Guidance from you? After everything?" Winter's smile widened. "Yes, Elder. Despite our differences in the past, your actions allowed reality itself to be reshaped, and for me to be released from its prison. For that, I am grateful." Elder's suspicion softened, but only slightly. "So, you won't help me directly?" Winter shook his head. "No, I won't, because I believe you and Serana are more than enough to deal with the tall man, but I can provide you with something that might tip the balance in your favor." Winter reached into a drawer beside him and pulled out a small, metallic device, its surface smooth and polished, with intricate designs carved into its frame. He handed it to Elder. "A creation of mine," he explained. "It's designed to revert demonic energy back into shadow, where it can be absorbed and harnessed. Use it wisely, Elder. You can take their power and make it your own. But do not let Serana use this. She is not strong enough. Only you are." Elder took the device, examining it closely, feeling the subtle hum of energy within. He turned to leave, but hesitated at the doorway. "Winter," he said, his voice low. "How did you know I would turn out this way? I am an elder, a predator, and a parasite. For centuries, I've been nothing more." Winter looked at him steadily. "No matter who we are, Elder, how we were born or what we've done, our past is not who we are. We are what we choose to become. I saw greatness in you before you saw it in yourself." Elder stared at Winter for a moment, as if weighing his words, then nodded. "Very well," he said. "I will do this. I will save the Flea and take down the tall man, so you don't have to." Winter smiled again, but his eyes held a deep intensity. "Good luck, Elder. Remember, the world will be watching." Elder turned and disappeared back into the shadows, the device clutched tightly in his hand, his mind already racing with possibilities. The tall man's days were numbered, and this time he would make sure of it. Elder and Serana sat in the dimly lit room, their expressions tense and contemplative as they discussed the plan. The air was thick with anticipation, a sense of urgency threading through their every word. Oliver stood a short distance away, nervously listening in, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his coat. He had always been there, lurking in the background, eavesdropping on their conversations. But today, something was different. A fire sparked in his eyes, a desire to change the narrative that had long held him captive. "I want to help," Oliver blurted out, his voice a mix of fear and determination. But I'm scared of the tall man. I've always been scared. That's why I hid in that house for so long." Elder turned slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at Oliver. His voice, usually commanding and fierce, softened with understanding. "Oliver," he began, "our past does not define us. What we were yesterday does not need to be who we are today." Elder smiled faintly, recalling Winter's words. "A good friend once told me that. Fear is just another obstacle. It does not have to be the reason we stand still." Oliver nodded, a flicker of hope light in his face. "I will help," he said, his voice stronger now. "I'll do whatever I can." Elder nodded in approval. "Then let it be done." Serana's eyes gleamed with fierce determination. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Eldor's arm and looking at Oliver with a rare smile. "As one," she echoed, her voice steady and unwavering. They were a strange trio, a powerful elder, a cunning shadow, and a frightened young boy, but they were united by a common cause, and for the first time, Oliver felt a surge of courage, a sense of purpose. They had a tall man to face, a Flea to save, and a reality to protect. And they would do it together, as one. The tall man sat hunched over his desk, his bony fingers tapping rhythmically against a worn book of ancient knowledge. His lips curled into a sly grin as he traced the arcane symbols on the page. He had discovered the whereabouts of another powerful trinket, a necklace once owned by a voodoo princess, a relic now used in ceremonies to raise the dead. Its power, he believed, would elevate him to new heights, making him unstoppable. "Flea!" he called out in a sharp voice that echoed through the chamber. Eliza appeared almost instantly, stepping from the shadows as if born from them. She kept her eyes down, always aware of her place. The tall man looked her over with his usual predatory gaze. "I need this, my little Flea," he said, his voice a mixture of excitement and command. "This necklace will grant me great power, just as I foresee Elder and his pathetic follower plotting something against me." He gestured to a faded, ancient map spread out on his table. "The trinket is hidden deep within the underground catacombs, lost in time. But beware, it is very dangerous. The followers of the voodoo clan are fiercely devoted to its secrecy." They moved to the ruins above, a vast open space of old brick and crumbling stonework. The air was thick with the scent of moss and decay, the shadows deeper than the night itself. The tall man pointed toward a darkened opening. "There," he said, his voice a hiss, "just as the text describe. Go now, and hurry back. I have no patience for delay." Eliza slipped into the darkness, moving like a wraith through cracks and narrow openings, her small frame perfectly suited for stealth. She navigated the labyrinthine passages with the skill she had honed over the years, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached a large, dimly lit room. At its center, a man sat, his face obscured, engrossed in an ancient book. Eliza's sharp eyes caught a glint of something shiny on a shelf. The trinket, she thought, her pulse quickening. She moved through the shadows, silent as death, her fingers outstretched, ready to snatch the prize. "Do not be in a rush to return to him, Eliza." The man suddenly spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "He will have his hands full soon enough." Eliza froze, startled. She turned slowly to see the man more clearly, his face covered with a chrome mask. A strange sense of familiarity struck her. "Do not fear," the masked man continued, his tone gentle yet firm. "Some friends will soon come to help you, once they've dealt with the tall man. You are safe here." Eliza's eyes darted to the trinket, still gleaming on the shelf. "And that trinket," the man added, with a quiet laugh, "it is nothing, merely something I set up long ago to feed the wrong information to the tall man, for a day just like this." Confusion washed over her, mingling with a newfound flicker of hope. She stared at the masked man, uncertain but intrigued. The game had changed, and she was no longer just a pawn. Above, in the darkened ruins, the tall man grew restless. His sharp eyes scanned the shadowy entrance to the catacombs below. His fingers twitched with impatience. "Where is she?" he growled, frustration creeping into his voice. "Fancy seeing you here." Eldur's voice cut through the thick silence like a blade. "What a coincidence," Serana added, her tone dripping with mockery. The tall man's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into a sly smile. "You are no match for me," he sneered, his confidence unshaken. "But come, try if you wish to meet your doom." With a flick of his wrist, the tall man summoned two demonic figures from the ground. They rose, their bodies engulfed in hellish flames, their eyes glowing with infernal power. The tall man smiled wider, his arrogance palpable. "Come, slayer of the master," he taunted Eldur. "When I defeat you, I will take the title of the most powerful elder." From the shadows, a timid voice called out, "No, you're just a bully." The tall man turned sharply, his attention drawn to the small figure emerging from the darkness. "You," he spat, recognizing Oliver. Taking advantage of the distraction, Eldur activated Winter's creation. The device glowed faintly, then burst into a radiant light. Within moments, the demonic flames around the two figures flickered and began to shift. They transformed from searing fire to dark, malleable shadows. Eldur swiftly moved forward, merging with them, absorbing their infernal energies into himself. His body seemed to pulse with newfound power. "What is this?" the tall man shouted in disbelief. "This is not possible!" Serana moved quickly, seizing him from behind. "You have no idea what is possible," she hissed into his ear. Eldur approached, his form shimmering with the dark energies he had absorbed. The tall man managed to wrench himself free from Serana's grip, but Eldur was upon him in an instant. They clashed, two elders battling in the dim light of the ruins. Eldur moved with a grace and speed that belied his size, his strikes powerful and unrelenting. The tall man fought back with all his might, but Eldur's newfound strength overwhelmed him. The fight raged on, each blow echoing through the empty space, but it became clear that Eldur had the upper hand. With a final surge of energy, Eldur landed a decisive blow that sent the tall man sprawling to the ground. The tall man lay on the cold stone floor, defeated and unmoving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Oliver stepped forward, standing over his fallen tormentor. He looked down at the tall man, his small frame seeming to grow in stature as he spoke. "I feared you my whole life," Oliver began, his voice steady and strong. "You stopped me from being who I am because of the fear you caused me. But now you are not so tall. I am tall. I will never let fear stop me from doing what I want to do again." The tall man's eyes widened in shock, a flicker of realization crossing his face. And then slowly, he began to fade, his body dissolving into the shadows, his form melting into the eternal darkness. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Within moments, he was gone, vanished forever into the endless shadows of eternity. Oliver stood tall, a quiet determination in his eyes. Eldur approached him, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Well done, Oliver," he said softly. "You stood up to your fear. You are taller than he ever was." Oliver nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "I'm not afraid anymore," he whispered, his voice filled with newfound courage. The shadow of the tall man was no more, and in its place stood a stronger, braver Oliver, a testament to the power of overcoming fear. Final chapter. The Man in the Mask. As Eldur, Serana and Oliver stood together in the stillness, they suddenly heard the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Their eyes turned to the source, and there, across the dim expanse, stood Winter, with Eliza by his side. "I'll take my device now, Eldur," Winter said, his voice calm and commanding. "I have much to do, so I must not delay." Serana, her body tense with the memory of their past encounters, spoke up, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and fear. "You set all this up. It took all our resources to figure out where the tall man would go next." Winter smiled faintly, nodding. "Yes, and you're welcome. I fed you that information so you would be here at the right moment." He paused, then looked directly at Serana. "Serana, you've changed so much, just like Elder. You don't have to fear me. In fact, I'd like to think I can count on your family, should I ever need help." Serana straightened, her posture shifting from fear to pride. "Yes, of course," she replied with newfound confidence. Winter's smile widened just a little before he vanished into the shadows, using the same abilities the elders wielded, leaving only a whisper in the air. Elder and Serana turned to Eliza, who stood there, her eyes cast downward, still wary and uncertain. "Look up, Eliza," Eldor said gently, stepping closer. "You never have to look down again. Come, meet your brother." Oliver, peeking from behind Elder, offered a tentative smile. "Hello," he said softly. Eliza's lips curled into a small smile. "I have been alone for so long." Elder nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know," he said. "I could feel you. Your pain called out to me every second of the day, but now I sense a change, a happiness." "Yes, my child," Serana added, placing a comforting hand on Eliza's shoulder. "We elders can know happiness. It's something we choose, something we fight for." Eliza looked between them, her smile widening, tears welling in her eyes. "Who was that man in the mask?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Eldur glanced at Serana, then back at Eliza. "Him?" Eldur replied, a hint of reverence in his tone. "He is the one who saved us." Eliza nodded, as if understanding something far deeper than words could convey, and for the first time in many years, she felt a sense of belonging, of hope, and of family. The end.